I'll be handing this over to Daphne, the co-founder and executive director of LiveGreen, which supports sustainability initiatives. LiveGreen's newest program is Clean Cities, which focuses on advanced technologies for transportation. Let's hear how Clean Cities can assist us move the needle forward in cleaner transportation.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. So, round of applause. Fingers, hands waved for Andrea. That was an amazing explanation of our technology. I think that was really helpful for me and for all of us. So I'm Daphne Dixon. I think I know a few of you out there, and I'm Executive Director and co-founder of LiveGreen and Clean Cities. Next. Okay, so LiveGreen. So our mission at LiveGreen is to integrate the 17 Global Sustainable Development Goals into corporations and communities through programs that really make a difference. And our organization has actually been around since 2008. We actually did our very first event. It was called the Green Fair. It was at the Bartlett Arboretum. It was, I think a lot of you back remember in 2008 when the world seemed to sort of be waking up around sustainability. There was a lot of green fairs. There was a lot of just excitement around everything. And I think my favorite thing about the Green Fair that we did at the Bartlett, it's where I actually met Patrice Gillespie. So it was a wonderful, wonderful event. We had about 25 exhibitors. And since then, our organization has done hundreds of events, from green drinks networking events up to conferences with national sustainability leaders. And we've done a lot of these conferences and events and gatherings. In the last year or so, we have refocused, and we're still obviously doing events because there's such a catalyst for change, but we're also now focused more on programs as well. And we're really excited about Clean Cities and our program with them. Next. So for those of you who don't know, Clean Cities is a national organization. It's funded by the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office. And as you can see here from this slide, Clean Cities has been around for quite some time, has its beginnings in 1988. And you can see right there all the things that led to the creation of Clean Cities. And the real purpose is to support fleets that want to make these transitions. There's actually almost 100 of these individual coalitions across the country. So that little tiny map to the right shows where the different coalitions are. And our coalition, the Connecticut Southwestern Area Clean Cities Coalition, has been around for 25 years. And it was led up until about a year ago by Ed Bowman, who many of you know is a hero in the town of Fairfield for his sustainability efforts. He's the Assistant Public Works Director for the town of Fairfield. And he led the coalition for all those years, and now I'm so excited to be taking it to the next place where it's going. Next slide, please. So this is our coalition. These are some of the things that we've done, and we're just really excited to work on some of these programs. And I can't stress enough, we are a resource to you. We're a resource to your towns. We're a resource to companies, and we offer all of this support to help you transition to electric vehicles. Next. Something I think is really important for people to remember when it comes to sustainability is we are not in this alone. I think we've all learned now that none of us are in anything alone. Everything is a connected world. But when it comes to sustainability, I think it's really important for us to remember and for us to share with others, especially when we're having these conversations, these deeper conversations about how can we transition our towns and our businesses and our cities to electric vehicles. Why is it important and why do we have to do it? Well, obviously there's a lot of reasons, but I think it's good to remember that the world agreed, to zero emissions by 2050. So this is something our entire world agreed on 5 years ago. So we have the world agreed to this. Then, of course, we have the International ZEV Alliance. That's more agreements. We have our more regional ZEV Alliance. And with that agreement, by 2025, Connecticut is supposed to have 125,000 EVs. And I don't think this is information that the average person knows. I know we know this, but I really believe this is information that it's really up to us to make sure that everybody knows this. And of course, then there's the awesome work of the Governor's Council, GC3 on transportation. But I think when we're talking to our community leaders, our municipal leaders, it's not necessarily in their job description, you know, to do sustainability. It might not be in their job description to transition to electric vehicles. But we have a commitment, our world has a commitment to meeting these goals. And I think we just all need to remind everybody that this is something where we all have to commit to this, and we have to ask others to join in this commitment. Next. You know, you always have to mention air quality, right? So we all know this information, but you know, those 21 days that we had last year, you know, none of us wants to see that again. So of course we all know that air quality is one of the driving, haha pun, forces in this transformation to electrification. So we have to do it. You know, as unfortunate as the current environment is with this terrible virus, I mean, the good thing is it is cleaning up our air a little bit. So how can we keep that momentum going with that clean air? Next. So our team, led by Andrea McCarthy, thank you so much. We participated in a municipal EV readiness study for the town of Fairfield. And it was an exceptional opportunity. And, you know, I think some of the best things about doing an EV readiness study is that you really learn that in order to have a municipality transition to electric vehicles, it's not one person, it's not two people, it's not even one group. You really have to get the whole town involved. And so doing a study is a great place to start. It's not a plan, it's a study. It's a starting place. It gives you the opportunity to talk to different groups, to see where the resistance is, see where the energy is, see where people are interested in doing stuff. But really, it's like a baseline. So where is it? Where is a town? And what are the opportunities? This photograph, actually Andrea took this photograph and Kelsey was at the event as well. This was Fairfield's Green Wheels Expo. It's our annual National Drive Electric event. And this bus came from White Plains, and it's a Lion electric school bus. And it has a range of 65 miles. And we invited them to come to our events, and they came to the Green Wheels Expo, and they plugged in, and it was a start of a lot of great things. That's okay, go next, that's fine. Okay, next slide, that's fine. Okay, so pathways to EV readiness. So what is EV readiness? Well, it's a lot of these things like we talked about. It's policy, it's, you know, it's investment, it's technology, and it's, like I said, it's really important to get the participation of relevant stakeholders. So you really, when you're wanting to transition your town, it's really about getting this coalition of stakeholders and having meaningful conversations with them, having a shared vision of what you want to do, and kind of, it's like a dance, and kind of taking it step at a time to see what's really possible. Next. So, you know, this is what it takes. We had a lot of conversations. Of course, this isn't exactly the people in Fairfield we talked to. It's idea of what collaborative teamwork and a vision looks like. You really want to have a lot of people around the table together when you're talking about how to envision your town. Next. Okay, so pathways to EV readiness. So there's a lot to it. There is there's the technology. There is the charging equipment and the infrastructure, and also the funding. So these are all things that, again, one person can't sit in a room by themselves and kind of figure this stuff out. These are collaborative efforts, and things that all have to be figured out sort of a step at a time. Next. So these are the key steps. So when Andrea and the team put this together, it takes about 4 months. You know, we contacted people from the town, developers, we talked with the police. We did a great survey with the chamber and economic and community development. We did a profile. We in the study, we looked not only at what Fairfield could potentially do, but we also looked at what are other states doing, what are other countries doing, because you really, when you put this study together, you don't want to just look just at Fairfield. You want to see what the world is doing, and you want to learn from what others are doing, because there's other places that are ahead of us in some of these ways, and we wanted to learn from everybody. So in the study, and you can all access the study. I believe Patrice sent the link out. So while I'm talking, if you want to look through it, there's a lot of details in there. So I encourage you to actually look at the study. Next. So again, these are all the people that we talked to: zoning, parking, building, permitting, all of these groups. We contacted all of them. We also talked with the COGS. So it was a very comprehensive group of people we talked to. We also talked with our task force. We contacted the car club. We talked with a lot of different organizations. Next. So zoning. So some of the, I would say one of the keynotes about zoning is, one of the things that can come up with zoning is, and this is something that has to be discussed. So one of the things that can come up with zoning is, should there be a percentage of parking that is designated for EVs? So if you have a parking lot or a new development, should there be a percentage that has to be EVs? So that's something that a town can discuss and look at, and that's something that you can even do in your own town. You can go to your own zoning department and talk with them about this, or this is one of these things. But that's one of the things that moves a town more towards EV readiness, is considering some of these zoning and incorporating requirements for zoning in the regulations. Next. Parking. We had a really interesting conversation with our police chief about the charging stations and ticketing. So of course we all know those stories. Somebody parks in a really great spot and they're there all day long, even though their car has been charged for hours. And so every town is different. So in our town, we could have a parking commission. They could instigate, specific parking regulations. I think Hartford has some, and there's other examples of this going on in other places, but it is something to consider. And it's one of these pieces, like what is your town doing with parking? Is it something you're talking about? Probably is. What is it? What is it that you would want to regulate? So that's something to consider. Next. Building codes and permitting. We had a really great conversation with the developers of a apartment, sort of a luxury apartment complex. And one of the things they're doing, although they did not have to do it, it wasn't anything that was mandated, but they offered EV charging stations to any potential tenant that had an EV. So when they put up their big tall building of apartments, they had a parking lot, and they put in 5 charging stations to begin with, and they filled up very quickly the building, and they had use for all of those chargers. So I said to them, well, oh my gosh, you've got 5 and they're all being used. What are you going to do when the 6th one comes along? And they said, we'll get another charger. So they were just very forward thinking. So people like that, developers like that, who are very forward thinking, they really don't need building codes or permitting, because they're just doing it. They just feel like that's what they should be doing. To them, it's just, just another day at the office doing that. We talked to some other developers who were not at all inclined to put in charging stations in their buildings. They didn't see the need. They weren't interested. And so, in a case like that, if there was a building code or permitting regulation that required them to do it, it would help them. So it's sort of a mixed bag. So again, part of the study was just seeing, well, where are we in our town? Well, we've got some that do and some that don't. The other thing that we learned that was interesting, I found interesting, was that most towns have their own EV permit when you're putting in a charging station, whether it's commercial or residential. It's most towns have their own. There is, you may or may not know, the state does have a permit for electric chargers that ideally, you know, all towns could just use. That would make it simple. So, you know, if a town doesn't have any charging stations, they could just use the state permit that has been created. So if a town needs a permit, they can use that state one. So there's a little inconsistency. So they're all a little bit different. To that point, we noticed that when we did some research, that when people do the charging permits and they go to their town to get it, the town doesn't separate out charging permits. They're an electrical permit. They're not separated. So if you call towns, or if you call your own town and say, hey, how many charging stations do you have? Can you look at your permits to see how many? They're not really going to be able to do that because they're going to be mixed in with all of the other electrical permits. So, you know, we thought that potentially a best practice is when towns are doing these charging station permits, that they potentially separate them so that so that they actually know, you know, they know exactly how many permits they have. They know exactly how many charging stations they have, because it's important for all of us to know how many we are getting, so we know how many more we need to go. There are websites, AFDC, you can always look at these websites and see the charging stations, but you know, sometimes they get missed. Sometimes a charging station goes in and it's not reported on these national websites. So having towns have a specific way to track them, you know, we felt was important. Next. Economic and community development. So when we did the study, one of the things that we wanted to make sure, and our task force is really good at this, I think it's Mary Hogue who's championing this, as she does so many things in Fairfield, but it's really important that any kind of anything to do with electric transitions, electrifying the transportation system, that it is incorporated in the POCD. I'm sure most of you know that, but it's a good reminder to have that in there. Talk with your directors there in town, see if they're interested in learning about EV adoption, see where they're at, see if that's something that they're really interested or not. What we found really interesting was there was a study, as you can see, done by Yale, that shows that people actually care, you know, so much more about environmental protection than they do about economic growth. So, you know, I know we're always, you know, concerned about, especially now with the economy, the challenges it's facing, but people really do care about the environment. And so that's really something I think that needs to go into the decision-making process when people are trying to decide what projects they should be doing. Next. Partnerships and funding. You can't do this without more than pennies. So we did look at, you know, in the study that we did, if you look at the study, you can see at the back, Andrea did a great job of finding a lot of different funding opportunities. There are funding opportunities for these kinds of projects. The most important thing, I can't stress this enough, is you can't just look for money and then figure out, oh, there's this money and, you know, what can I do with it? You really have to be, you know, looking at what projects are in potential and figuring it out, having those stakeholder meetings, meeting with people, figuring out what you could do so that when the money comes, you're not caught flat-footed. These grants are usually a pretty short window. There's usually not too much time to get everything together. And you really need to be working your projects along the way so that when these grants come up, you're ready to go. And so it's just always important to be working towards a project. Next. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so it's not a question. Oh, come back, you slide. Okay, it's not a question of if. So, you know, one of the things when we were going around talking with people doing the study is I actually had people, actually smart, successful people, say things like, oh, those EVs, don't they just blow up? I had people say, do we really need to do this? You know, I had people say, I don't really see a lot of EVs around. I don't think it's really going to happen. That's what people said. So that's why these studies, again, going back, are so important to find out where, you know, what people are really thinking. But I can tell you, and as you know, it's not a question of if, but when. So we know that major car manufacturers have all committed to EVs. You know, we know it's all happening, and it's happening. You know, we've got Norway who's committed to 2025, no more, you know, ice, and there's other countries following suit. So it is happening. It's one of those things we don't always see it, but for those of when you know those people who are kind of resistant to it, you know, we just have to show them the facts and what's actually going on. Next. So these are some of the obstacles some people do. They think it's a fad. They think, oh, you know, there was those hydrogen cars and that didn't really work out. There's, you know, there's the expense. There's still a little bit, the range is getting better because the technology is getting so much better. You know, the more we do these drive and rides, people can get behind the wheel and they can see that there's this performance. And then the other obstacle is this: if you don't have a garage. So that's why it's so important for, you know, workplace charging and some of these other things to happen, or with apartments to have charging, so that people who don't have a garage actually do have a place to charge. Next. So in the survey, we found this really exciting. So that's a huge percentage. 68%. Wow. So that's a lot of people who either have one or want one. So that really just shows, you know, where we're going, where the trend is going. Next. We found this really fascinating, that people felt like their employer should install charging stations. So, you know, that this was a surprise to me, and also, you know, great opportunity. We'll list this later, but it's like one of our outcomes, you know, so we need to have, when times transition a bit, you know, have workplace charging workshops. And that's something that we are working on actually at a regional level, to be doing this workplace charging outreach, because it's a huge opportunity and something we really need to consider in our towns and regionally. Next. And look at that. So if people had this access, it does actually, you know, it changes people's minds if they felt they had a place to charge. So getting, you know, finding out what people in your own community are thinking is really important. Next. So what if we don't do it? What if we don't do this? You know, Connecticut has an older population. We have trouble keeping people in our, you know, not during quarantine, but in regular times, you know, we have trouble keeping our younger people here. Younger people who we want to have stay in Connecticut. You know, they want new technology. They want EVs. They want all these things. So there's all of these reasons why, you know, not solving the EV challenge is going to cost us in the long term, which I know you all understand, but something we really need to be sharing with people. Next. All right, so we had the old way, and, you know, with the ICE cars and not really paying attention. And, you know, we really have to collectively just agree that we're going to move our state to this new way of thinking. And those naysayers, we're just going to show them the new way. We're going to show them the ways this does work. You know, we're going to explain the fun technology and all the ways that having an EV ready town, how it really helps everybody. Next. So these are some considerations that are important to think about. Next. So these are some outcomes. So when we did the study, we were finishing it up at the end of the year. And one of the outcomes we had from doing the study is we had this conference on sustainable development. And there you see Andrea. She had a magnificent panel with Beverly from the Chamber, Mark Barnhart, and others that contributed to the study to talk about it. So we had this, you know, conference. We mainly had it to share the study. So it was a great outcome. At that meeting, or at that conference, there was a meeting between a few people that actually, task force members and others with the utilities, that led to a meeting at the utilities about doing a vehicle to grid project, that was modeled after the White Plains project. And so, you know, because of the study, we did the conference. At that conference, there was a meeting. That meeting led to another meeting. And now that meeting is leading to a grant. So because of that meeting, we brought in other technology partners, and we have applied for you know, a multi-million-dollar grant to fund some school buses in Fairfield. So I don't know how much that would have happened if those partners and stakeholders would have come together in that kind of magical way if it hadn't been for the study, for the conference, for that meeting. So that was a really great outcome. Also, I saw that Pam Roach is on the call. I know at the conference, Pam approached us and she invited us to come to their SCROG meetings, and we came to a couple different meetings and talked about EV readiness there. So we were able to bring more towns into this conversation and talk with them about that. And then from those meetings, that led to, Tracy Babbage was at one of those meetings, and then that led to doing this really magnificent event at Deep last month with Pam and Tracy and Kate from Deep. And that was the Municipal Collaboration on Fleet Electrification. We brought together, I think it was like 45 towns or more to talk about what they would need to do to move their fleet along. So that was an outcome really of doing this study. We are going to be starting these monthly fleet calls where decision makers in towns can come to a call. They can kind of see what everybody else is doing. They can get resources. We can kind of help each other move along this path. Because of the conversations in the study about parking enforcement, we have found that working with police and kudos to Westport for their electric vehicle, yay. But working with police is really important, and along with the parking rules. So we're working on that, and the workplace charging workshop I mentioned, and then also looking to create an EV task force with our Sustainable Fairfield Task Force. We are incorporating some of these goals into our task force, but also reaching out further than our task force and working with Economic and Community Development Commission and others to create a task force to really help drive this forward. So those are some of the outcomes that came from this study. Every town is different. If another town did a study, they would have other outcomes. But the great thing is these studies are a catalyst for moving these things forward. Next slide. Okay, so there's, as you can see, there's many benefits to the town. You can see all of them. Next slide. I think it's more benefits. There's a lot of benefits. There's just a lot of benefits to doing these studies. Again, it's a starting place. You get people together, you figure out your projects, you have these conversations, you bring in the different stakeholders, the different technology partners, you envision a project, you start to envision the project while you're kind of looking for the grants. So you're kind of doing things in parallel, and then then you apply for a grant, and that's how these things start to work. It's a lot of forward motion. It's a lot of consistent effort of a team of people trying to move this forward. Next. Okay, so the conclusions are: it takes a team. There are always a lot of things to work out. This is not cookie cutter. It's just everything, every situation is different. So there's not like one size fits all. You're always going to have resistance. It's always going to be 10, 20% of the people in any group on any topic that are going to resist. And that's just human nature. And then, you plan it and the money will come. That's just kind of the way it works. Next slide. Okay, next steps. So slide. Next slide, thank you. So next steps. So these are some of the things that you can come back. Some of the things you can do. You can come to our call. We'll send out that meeting announcement for any of those who you want to come. Talk with your Economic and Community Development Director. You can read all these, do these things. Set up a meeting with myself, our team. We can talk you through some of these things. We are here to help and support you. We want to help your town transition to electric. And next slide. This is Jeff Sachs. I don't know how many are you familiar with him, but you know, we all need to make decisions and work together so we can move the needle on where we are. And he says it so well. And so I wanted to share that quote with you all from Jeff Sachs. Next slide. Yes. So we can answer those questions offline if you have the emails. We want to answer all the questions, and we can just do it at a later time. Maybe during the break. Okay. All right. Electric school buses. Okay. We love electric school buses. Next slide. Okay. So electric school bus champions. So what we are looking for, so this is a very active project program. So we are looking to find people to raise their hand to say, hey, I want to be an electric school bus champion, and to work with whoever is willing to attend our Electric School Bus Alliance call next Thursday to learn how you can inspire and lead your town to electric school buses. So this is a very, like I said, I can't stress this enough. This is an active program. This isn't just like, here's a presentation. This is like, how can we help you get involved in your town? Next. So we've created this toolkit to kind of break down the process of how do I get an electric school bus in my town? How can we be like Middletown? So you need a team. You need to understand the procurement process of it. You need to know know a little bit about the technology. You know, to get the process going, you don't have to be, a technical person to know what the technology is about. It helps, but you don't have to be. You want to know a little bit about the charging structure, and you do have to understand a little bit about the economics. So those are the things. Those are the main categories in our toolkit. Next. We can go to the next. Okay, so the team. So who's on the team? So the first, it's really important that that as a community member, as a task force leader, you sometimes you're the one that has to get the ball rolling. The way it worked in Fairfield, going back to the previous presentation, was our sustainability task force did that Green Wheels event that had the school bus, that let the fleet operations director for our schools, he came to our event. We invited him to the event. He came to the event. He got on that bus with his kids, and a few months later, he was doing an RFP. Would he have done the RFP if he hadn't gotten on that school bus? I should probably ask him that, but I'm not sure he would have. So we really need people in the towns to raise their hand and kind of get the ball rolling, and then identify, start the dialogue with that decision maker, and get as many people as you can to kind of start formulating like who's really interested in doing this. So you got to get your team. Okay, next slide. So the procurement. So this is an important part. So there's four kind of main things with, how do we get the electric bus? Like, what is this thing? So there's the RFP. So the RFP needs to be written by the school. And let me caveat with this. Most schools don't own their own buses. So they have a service provider. So they do an RFP, the service provider answers it. The service provider is buying the bus. They're buying the buses from the OEMs. And then there's also this charging infrastructure that has to be figured out. Typically the service providers will manage that, but they're not going to know everything, and they're not always going to come up with they might not come up with the best solution for your town. So these are kind of the four main things. So you have to know who your RFP person is. The service provider, that's really going to be whoever the town, chooses with the RFP. And again, so you don't really have control over that. It's good to know about the school bus manufacturers, look at the different buses just for your own information. It's interesting to see the different ones. And then charging infrastructure there's more about that on the next slide. I think I have like 2 minutes to finish all of this, so I'm going to have to talk fast. There's a lot of different kinds of infrastructure. There is, V2G is a really interesting technology, and that's something that some school bus projects, they do have that that aspect to their electric school bus charging project. You don't have to, but it's something that you would decide with your team. Next slide. So this is an interesting thing. So we're trying to figure out like how to bring the costs down. So this is what's happening. So these electric school buses are new, right? So the OEMs, the manufacturers are saying, well, they're good for about 12 years. But there's not any electric school buses that have been around for 12 years. So the service providers need to figure out, you know, a cost model that works for them. And they need to factor in, if they get an electric school bus, the reduced maintenance cost, how long is that bus going to last? And, you know, this is new territory. So the service providers are doing the best they can to give, you know, to come in with the best prices, but they're learning things themselves too. And there needs to be more and more conversations between the service providers and the bus manufacturers so that they can actually agree, really, what is the life expectancy of the bus? Is it 12 years? Is it 15 years? Is it 10 years? Really, what are the maintenance savings? And so one of the roles we're taking on with our coalition is to help facilitate more conversations between the service providers and the manufacturers to help them understand how they can get these costs, how they can look at them, the whole picture, so they can really understand what it does really cost for the electric school buses and how much money can be saved. Next slide. So this is a work in progress, but you can see that there's, you know, these are broad numbers, but, you know, there's a lot of money to be saved in the maintenance costs when you run an electric bus as opposed to diesel. So it's not comparable yet. There's still a gap, even with the maintenance savings and the fuel savings. There is still a gap between, if you buy an electric school bus, even with the savings, the difference between that and a diesel bus. So it's, you know, it will come down, but there is, you know, but you have to know what that number is. You have to know how much, you know, how big of a grant do you need to, you know, to get your bus. Next slide. So the economics. So there are grants. There's this DOE grant, like I said, we're working on in Fairfield. There's VW grants, there's DERA grants, there's Connecticut DERA grants, and there's national grants. And there's, you know, one of the things I'm really excited about is DERA has a very special electric school bus grant opportunity where they like regional projects. And so, you know, one thing we're really interested in looking at is if we could get several towns who are interested in electric school buses and we could somehow work together with a service provider. So one service provider would buy a bunch of buses and then those would go out to different towns. Like a project like that, some kind of regional project like that where we're working with a service provider, one service provider, an OEM, to give cost savings to several towns. So that's, to me, a pretty exciting project to be working on. Next slide. These are some case studies. We will be posting details of case studies on our website, livegreenct.org, under EVs case studies. I think they'll be up. I think Emily's putting those up on Friday or so. But there'll be case studies of all kinds of awesome projects that are going on all over the country. With a lot of them have YouTube videos, so you can hear the people talk and they share their stories. So that's just, it's great. They tell you the kind of technology. Some use additional technology, some of them don't. Next slide. So this is just a particular one, a case study in Massachusetts that was really successful. Our friend Steve Russell is a Clean Cities coordinator in Massachusetts, and he did a phenomenal job. It was a pilot project, so it was funded through DOE, and it's doing great. We actually have the full presentation on our website. We do have that case study up. There's a great video. I encourage you to watch it. Next slide. So these are some key points. So you need to understand, you know, you got to do the math on it and see, you know, if we get these many buses, there's this extra $100,000 that we need to cover. So this is the kind of grant dollars we need. Really, the other key player that I want to emphasize is important to work with is your utility. So when you're building your team, your electric school bus team, you're going to want to talk with your utility, and I can help you. I can direct you to the right person to talk to if you don't already have that contact or you just want to talk about it. Working with the utilities is critical, and they want to be a part of this, but every town is different, and so it's just it's a case-by-case kind of story. Next slide. Okay, so there's all these school buses across the country, so many of them. Just think if we could just get them all to go electric. So we need people like you, like me, like all of us to be electric school bus superheroes and have fun figuring this out together. And how can we have these electric school buses all over Connecticut and all over our region? Next slide. We can go to the next slide. So yay, Middletown, they're awesome. Look at them on the map, awesome. They're terrific. They got that grant that covered that thing. So they're gonna have a little bit of a delay, but they're getting their buses, so kudos. Next slide. These are some Clean Cities resources up and beyond the electric school bus thing. I encourage you to look at all of these, Google any of these for additional resources on other ways that you can learn about charging stations, where they are, fuel economy, all of that. We have Spanish resources, which is great. Next slide. We are available to do all kinds of ongoing trainings. As I said, we're really here to support you. We have our Electric School Bus Alliance call the second Thursday of every month. We invite you to join us. We can send out a link, an invitation, and we just want to help. Next slide. Okay, I'm a little bit over, but oof. All right.
No problem. So we had a few questions, but since we are running a little bit behind, we'll keep those questions and we can get back to them either at a later date or respond to people individually through different means.
Yes, yeah, we want to answer everybody's questions. Okay, and go back one slide. If you do, I just want to encourage you, if you do have information or you do want to connect regarding the Electric School Bus Alliance, you can contact Kelsey today and tell her that you're interested in resources, you want to join the meeting, and she will provide you with additional details on that. So if you want to reach out today to Kelsey, that would be awesome. Or to me, I'm excited to talk to you too.